Talks are continuing to try to resolve the row that's led to widespread disruption of football coverage across the BBC. There are fears that more programming could be affected on Sunday, including the Women's Super League and Match of the Day too. Sports presenters boycotted Saturday's programmes in support of Gary Lineker, who was asked to step down from Match of the Day after he criticised the UK government's asylum policy on Twitter. The show went ahead with no presenters or commentary and began with an apology instead of its famous theme tune. Simon Jones reports.
Now on BBC One, we're sorry that we're unable to show our normal Match of the Day, including commentary tonight.
A Match of the Day unlike any other. No presenter, no pundits, not even the famous theme tune. Instead, 20 minutes of highlights, commentary replaced by the sound of the crowd. Gary Lineker himself spent the afternoon watching his former side Leicester City. The BBC's highest paid star forced to step back over a tweet about the government's migration policy. His suspension prompted what's being described as a mutiny at the corporation, as other presenters and commentators walked out in support of Lineker, leaving the BBC's Director General to admit it had been a difficult day.
I'm listening hard. This has been a tough time for the BBC, and we care about our audiences. We want to get the right outcome for this. We're working very hard to get that done, and I would like to see Gary Lineker return on air on the BBC. Now, with that, we have to listen. I think we have to do a bit of thinking about the balance between, how you are delivering impartiality and also the ability for people to, particularly freelancers, to say things online.
Fans attending the Leicester game had strong views on Gary Lineker's expressions of his views.
I support him. I'm glad to see that other players and other pundits have supported him. So hopefully BBC get the finger out and we get it put to bed and get him back on TV.
I'm disappointed with some of his comments, to be honest. I think he's let himself down.
Well, I think it's outrageous. He's just expressing an opinion, which happens to be at loggerheads with what the government have said.
And the Liverpool boss, who saw his side beaten at Bournemouth, also wanted to have his say.
I cannot see any reason why I would ask somebody to step back for saying that. I can't, but that I'm not sure if that's a language issue or not, but I can find it.
For the BBC, this is an issue of impartiality. The corporation says people working in news can't express any political opinions. Caution is advised for all staff, but the BBC guidelines say the risk is lower where an individual is expressing views publicly on an unrelated area, for example, a sports or science presenter expressing views on politics or the arts. But the top talent have also been told there is an additional responsibility to the BBC because of their profile on the BBC.
This situation has caused a lot of concern for people working across the BBC in relation to how they respond to the impartiality guidelines, which in our view, they need to be both proportionate but also applied consistently.
A small demonstration outside the BBC Sport headquarters in Salford, calling for Gary Lineker's reinstatement. Sports programmes could be disrupted again today. Match of the Day has been a staple of the TV schedules for almost 60 years. Gary Lineker has been at the helm for almost a quarter of a century. As he returned home last night, no comment, but his son George told the Sunday Mirror his father will always speak up for those who don't have a voice. Will he go back to Match of the Day? I think so. He loves Match of the Day, but he won't ever back down on his word. So the BBC and their star presenter remain divided. The corporation remains in crisis. Simon Jones, BBC News.
Well, our correspondent Stefan Powell gave us this analysis a little earlier.
This has become a very important issue for the organisation, for its public perception. It's probably much more now than a story about the tweet and the discussion about the editorial guidelines. The very fundamental value of the BBC is at play here, and whether or not it can secure its impartiality, but at the same time offering free speech to its presenters who don't work in news and current affairs. It doesn't seem like the story is going to slow down anytime soon, because reaching an agreement like that is likely to take some time. And for people who are frustrated by the sports programmes that were taken off yesterday or weren't seen to their fullest or their usual quality, then they're unlikely to see any difference today because, of course, the BBC has lots of sports programming, football programming especially, that is supposed to be on air today, and it is unlikely that we're going to see a deal between the BBC and Gary Lineker to agree a plan moving forward in time to sort out those programmes. So, for example, Match of the Day 2, the sister show to Match of the Day, is supposed to be on tonight. There are commentaries on 5 Live, Radio 5 Live throughout the afternoon. Also 606, the football phone-in on that station that didn't run yesterday, is supposed to be on air at some point today as well. So there is certainly an uncertainty going forward, but it is really important for the BBC as an organisation to try and solve this issue, because this is a story that has snowballed in the last few days. The Prime Minister answering questions about it. It's trending on social media. It's leading the front pages of all the major newspapers today. This is a big issue for the BBC now, far more than them trying to solve a deal over one particular tweet.
Yeah, tell us more about the political elements of this, because Tim Davie has said that he was not pressured by any political party over this. We've heard from Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, and also from the opposition Labour Party over this.
Yeah, so the Prime Minister was saying in his response to this question, it's got nothing really to do with me. He hopes to see Gary Lineker back on the screen, but says it was something to do with the BBC and its star presenter and not an issue of the government. He then went on to defend the immigration policy, which was at the very heart of this story at the beginning. That was the policy that Gary Lineker criticised in his original tweet. Like you said, the Director General said that this was nothing to do with involvement from a specific political party or the government, but this was more a general principle around the BBC's impartiality, which, like I was saying, is obviously a fundamental part of the BBC as an organisation, but also of the Director General Tim Davie's tenureship in charge. So it is a big issue that we will see continue to be discussed here at the BBC throughout the day.
Stefan Powell there. Well, Stuart Purvis, former Chief Executive of ITN, joined me earlier today.
There is a vagueness about the BBC guidelines on this issue, or actually there are almost contradictions within the guidelines. But Gary Lineker was told before that he had breached the guidelines, so he was aware that these guidelines existed. And if he went into making these comments, he must have been aware that he was leaving himself open to some kind of action. That's the BBC's perspective on it. Of course, there is a political perspective to this, which is that this is all about the British government's asylum policy and the taking of sides between, if you like, those who support the government on that and those who opposed it. And that's why it's become such a big issue in the UK. It isn't just a row about a football presenter.
Yeah, where does politics come into this? Tim Davie, the Director General, denies bowing to any political pressure.
Yes, I mean, the view amongst some BBC staff is that the BBC is doing the government's bidding on this. I don't think there's any real evidence of that, but I do think that the current BBC leadership is particularly mindful of what the government thinks on broadcasting issues. So they would have noticed last night that at about the same time that Tim Davie was clearly uncomfortable with the position the BBC was now in, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, actually issued a statement, unusually at 6 o'clock on a Saturday night, to say that clearly leave me out of this. It was actually almost in praise of Gary Lineker. So I don't think the government is actually now pushing the BBC to be even tougher on Gary Lineker. Possibly almost the opposite, that they really welcome now a solution that gets everybody off the hook.
Yeah, what could the possible solution be to this, do you think?
Well, in his interview, Tim Davie talked about reflecting on the guidelines. And I think what he means by that is, could we have another look at these guidelines, make them clearer about what freelance broadcasters can and can't say on their Twitter feeds? And that would take some time. I mean, you could have a relatively quick review, or you could actually take months over it. And what do you do in the meantime? Is Gary Lineker to be reinstated as the presenter? Is he going to be asked to apologise for something? If so, what exactly would he have to apologise for? Would he agree to apologise? So there's so much uncertainty, and there's a programme tonight, there's another Match of the Day tonight. Is this going to be solved in time? Difficult to see it can be solved completely, but maybe some kind of fudge can be created just to get BBC Sport properly back on the air.
How big a crisis is this for the BBC, which of course has impartiality and trust at its very core?
It's absolutely about the mission of the BBC, but the current leadership have, I think, made more of this problem than it actually was in the first place. place. I mean, look, the BBC has been through difficulties in recent times about the coverage of Brexit and things like that. But at the heart of it, there are BBC journalists day in, day out doing a really good job. And by kind of constantly talking about impartiality as a problem, sometimes they've made it more of a problem. And this is another example, really, of where they've created a problem of their own choosing by taking on an issue which they could have solved, backstage, shall we say, some time ago.